This is the fourth in a series about the Gulf of Maine, and today we're going to talk about the Fundy Coast. So with that, we'll be sharing the screen. All right.
And Steve, I should have mentioned Steve is one of our star docents at the Wells Reserve. He volunteers so much of his time. So thank you, Steve.
Hey, you're welcome. And there are plenty others too. All right. This is the Bay of Fundy. The fun shown right here. It's surrounded by the state of Maine, New Brunswick, Canada, and also Nova Scotia. The Fundy Coast itself, and I'm thinking it's like from here all the way to the official end of it, probably about past McCarty Bay, is about 746 miles. And the bay itself is about 168 miles in length. Good size. The Bay of Fundy tides are mixed semi-diurnal tides. You have two highs and two lows, and the two highs don't necessarily equal each other. They can be different. And the same with the lows. The tides are really important to the Bay of Fundy as part of the coastal building process. And throughout the bay and the Gulf of Maine itself, there are eroded bluffs or embankments on the shore, and the rivers, there are eroded bluffs and embankments, and rivers are the source of the sand and mud that goes into the Gulf of Maine. And what that sediment does is it ends up producing mudflats and salt marshes, and also some goes into the deep ocean basins. As far as the Fundy tide itself, each tidal cycle moves 100 billion metric tons of water. Metric ton is larger than our imperial ton. Here, it's about 2,200 pounds. That's enough water to fill the Grand Canyon. So quite a bit of water moves in and out each day. And I think one of the things that got me most interested in the Bay of Fundy, and this goes back to, I'm going to say fourth grade geography, was there was a picture similar to this in the book that showed a fishing boat on floating and then one on the shore, one on the floor rather, ocean bottom. And that kind of indicates the tidal range. And if you go south of Cape Cod along the eastern seaboard, generally the tides are less than 4 feet. In Wells, the tide generally runs about 8 to 12 feet. When you move up to Passamaquoddy Bay, which is right at the top of where Maine meets Canada, the tide is 28 feet there. But the Bay of Fundy itself has as tides as high as 52.5 feet. And those are the highest tides in the world. And this Alma, New Brunswick is probably about 7 hours north of here. So it's not too far away. It's probably a couple hours into Canada. Okay. And I wanted to show this here. Here you've got the Bay of Fundy, and these lines here show the height of the tides at these particular areas. If you go and look at the 12 meters, 12 meters is equal to a 39-foot tide. You come over here, this section here, here in the Miners Basin, 14 meters, 46 feet tide. And then when you get way up here at the very head of the bay, is where you have your highest tides, and that's where they range about 52.5 feet. There's a number of contributing factors as to why the Bay of Fundy has such high tides, but they generally go on the shape, the depth, and the oscillation of the water. The shape itself kind of tapers down. It gets a little bit more narrow as you get up, especially you get up into these other areas. But also, as the water goes into the bay and up this way, it ends up getting shallower. Okay, so the channel that the water has to go in is narrower and it's shallower, which pushes the water level higher. The other thing is the oscillation of the water. It's called a siche wave, excuse me, a siege wave. And basically, it's just like water in a bucket or water in a bathtub. You know, once you get the water rocking, it moves from side to side. What the oscillation of the Bay of Fundy does is it pretty much works in conjunction with the tides. So when the highest tide comes in, the water is oscillating towards the head of the bay, which gives you the higher tides. And with a siege wave, one of the things about it is the body of water must be partially constrained. The Bay of Fundy is constrained on three sides. But basically what happens is that the wind gets blowing onto the water and it gets the whole body of water rocking. And it's interesting because some of the Great Lakes experience this, in particular Lake Erie, when the wind blows down on it. And sometimes it's been considered that people have called the Great Lakes and said that the Great Lakes have tides. They really don't have tides, but what you're seeing is the oscillation of the water in the Great Lake itself. And on Lake Erie, it takes about 7 hours for that oscillation to go from one extreme to the other. The Bay of Fundy has more than 40 ports and harbors. It's got a very diverse fishery. They go after groundfish, flounder, cod, mackerel, scallop, lobster, and soft shell clams are also a big business for Fundy. The bay itself has up to 12 species of whales, dolphins, and porpoises during the summer months. And the most predominant whale species are the minke, humpback, finback, and North Atlantic right whale. The humpback and the North Atlantic right generally run about 50, 60 feet. The minke is a smaller whale, probably about 30. And the finback itself is the second largest whale in the world, and it's right after the blue whale. I did want to include this picture of a humpback, and it's showing its baleen, and basically you can see that if this whale is going after feed fish or whatever it's gonna want to eat, it has that baleen to strain the food out of the water. The northern horse mussel is actually quite prevalent in the Bay of Fundy. And what it does is it produces a biogenic habitat with a high amount of diversity. Okay. The mussels attract a lot of other life, attract and support a lot of other life. The mussel beds themselves grow on sediment mounds, like is shown in this bottom picture. And how those mounds developed was that there was an ancient coral reef where the mounds are, and it ended up getting covered with gravel. It died off, and when it got covered with gravel, it formed mounds that are parallel to the current. And as we speak, there's a significant horse mussel population loss in areas that have been fished for scallops. The reason for that is when they fish for scallops, they use a dragger that has forks, maybe about a foot long, that go into the sediment and it pops everything up into the net. Well, if you go through and you hit one of these horse mussel beds, you basically have torn it all apart. And this is a good example of why fishermen need to know what is down on the ocean floor. And I think I was on one of the first presentations. I showed that, you know, when they know what's there, they can do the dragging in such a way that it's not destroying the mussel beds or other life forms that are down there. These are semi-palmated sandpipers, and it has to be at the Bramber Weir, which is a large mudflat type of area. And there are about 21 different shorebirds that migrate along the East Coast. And the Fundy mudflats are very important for them because, like for example, with these semi-palmated sandpipers, they will stage and feed on the mudflats for several weeks. And what they're doing is they are building up their energy reserves for migration. And these mud flats have contain mud shrimp with densities of up to 60,000 in a square meter. So there's a lot of small shrimp in the mud. Well, why does the semi-palmated sandpiper need so much to eat? Well, they breed in the Arctic up here, and they winter in the northern coast of South America. Their total migration is about 4,700 miles. And when they go from the mudflats of Fundy to South America, they are going 3,000 miles nonstop over the ocean. So they need to build up their strength to do that. Here's a close-up of a semi-palmated sandpiper, and these birds themselves are between a sparrow and a robin in size. So they're not a very big bird. They're probably just a little bit smaller than a robin for the most part. This is Mary's Point, and my wife and I happened to go here a number of years ago. And this is obviously one of the feeding grounds. The day that we happened to be there, there were about 35,000 of the birds on the shore that day. And it was really interesting because they will fly. When one takes off, they all tend to take off. And we had the experience of seeing a merlin, which is like a raptor, flying through the flock of birds, and it was kind of interesting to see how they all scrambled and took the hint, get out of the way. This is what the mud flats at Mary's Point look like. We're looking at several different mud flats today too. This is actually starting in the Nova Scotia side, and Digby, Nova Scotia is one of the first towns that you run across, or major towns that you run across in the Nova Scotia side. And I thought this was an interesting shoreline, and it looks like basalt. And if you look at the shapes, they look like they might have like multi-sided columns there, much like the Devil's Staircase in Ireland. This is another picture from Digby, and looking at this type of shore, you can see that there's a sea cave here. There's a bunch of, it looks like sedimentary or metamorphic rock, and it's pretty broken down, old, and obviously you can see that it's really been pushed up by geologic forces. There are a number of basins in the Bay of Fundy and actually throughout the Gulf of Maine. But these basin areas are the areas that collect sediment. Major areas would be up here and the Minas Basin right here. This is a picture of the Minas Basin Bay in Torrell, Nova Scotia. And keep in mind that this is probably more of a sand flat than a mud flat, but it's very common for tides to go out as much as or over 2 miles at low tide. This is Burncoat Head, and it is officially the place that had the world's highest tides, and they averaged 58.4 feet, higher than what we normally give the Bay of Fundy credit for. And this is part of the Miners Basin in Nova Scotia. One thing to keep in mind here, if you look at this, you'll see that this is this reddish stone. It is a softer sandstone, which has a lot to do with why the Bay of Fundy has so much sediment. This is also a picture of from Bramber Shore, obviously not in the mudflats, but this looks like a sea stack here. And if you look at it, you can see the it's actually sedimentary conglomerate that made the sea stack up. And it's kind of interesting how it's eroded. And the same goes for over here on the right, a different type of stone, probably sandstone and some basalt here. Different stones get mixed in on the coast, but mostly it's metamorphic rock and sandstone. This is a my last picture, I believe, of that from that Bramber Shore area. And I included it because here we have probably some mudstone and sandstone up here. And I wanted to include it because you can see the folds in the rocks. And those happened when the sediment was soft and the earth moved and changed the direction of the sediment. And I included this one over to the right. It looks like it shows like a cave or a grotto type of thing, but it also it really you can see that this is very much a sedimentary type of rock because you can see all the different layers in it. As you go along the Fundy coast, there's a number of provincial parks there. We would call them national parks in this country. In that country, it's in Canada, they're referred to as provincial parks. And this is from Five Islands, Nova Scotia. And again, you can see what the surrounding cliffs look like. And again, this looks like a sandstone. These are referred to as the Red Cliffs, and they are also at the Five Islands Park. And you can see the red sandstone here and up here, and I would almost think it's some sort of a mudstone, which is a type of sedimentary stone also that has broken down. And I think it's quite interesting how it has flown down over the lower sandstone that's below. This is over here is the over to the left is where that where these red cliffs actually end up here, and this goes out to a rocky outcrop that's referred to as Redhead. And one of the things that I think is very interesting about this picture is that you can see the color of the sandstone there. And if you look at the water over to the right, you can see that it is heavily influenced by what erodes off these cliffs. I included this because it just has so many interesting things in it. It's Cape Chignico Provincial Park. It's in Nova Scotia, Canada. And as you look at it, you can see, obviously, you have some rocky headlands. And over in here, that looks like a salt marsh. And this looks like it could be the estuary that is draining into the sea. And I thought this was interesting here. This formation on top of looks like on top of some bedrock. And it just struck me as being one of those Buddha statues that people would put in their gardens. And it looks like something somebody's placed there. This is the Three Sisters Rock Formation, also at Cape Chinico Park. It's in Nova Scotia. And one of the things about this type of formation is that oftentimes when it starts out, it will start out as a large, I'm going to call it a web, a fan. It'll be a width of rock that's extending out into the ocean. What eventually happens is that the waves will go through and they'll start making a grotto. Eventually, the grotto will grow and it'll become a cave that you can actually see, excuse me, it's an arch rather, that you can see through the arch. And eventually what will happen is the top of the arch falls down to the bottom, and they become a sea stack. And you can see that there's actually 3 different sea stacks in this one formation. This is Hopewell rocks. It is a reddish brown conglomerate. They're made out of a reddish brown conglomerate, and it is sandstone and mudstone rock, both sedimentary rocks. And Hopewell rocks is actually a very big tourist attraction. And one of the ways that they advertise it is come to Hopewell Rocks, and it's the place we can walk on the ocean bottom. This is another picture of Hopewell Rocks, and you can see here you've got an arch that's going right through this particular rock. This is that same rock, but with showing obviously people on the seabed, but also how high that the water would come. And if you look at the height of the people and assuming they're about 5 feet tall, you've got probably about over here, it looks like could be 15, 20 feet of water. Here probably looks like could be close to 15 feet of water. And that's right next to shore. This is an idealized picture of it, and I included it not so much as scientific value, but it really is quite a nice picture. Okay, as we move around, this is Fundy, moving down into Fundy National Park itself, and that is in New Brunswick. And Fundy's about 7 hours from here, this national park. You can see the rocky shore, and the trees go right up to it, right up to the cliffs. This seems so typical of how I think about Fundy. It might not be a perfect representation, but you have the rocky shore, and this looks like it could be an inlet, or it could be a little river flowing out. My thoughts are it's probably a river that's flowing out into the bay that's on the other side of these rocks. At Fundy National Park, the tides recede 2 to 2.5 miles. And that picture of Mary's Point, which I was on earlier in the slide, Mary's Point is very close to this area. So we're talking, massive amounts of mudflats. And you can see, if you look out there, you pretty much can't even see the water. Mudflats in a number of places in the Bay of Fundy, but some of the more noteworthy ones are here at Shiniko Bay, Chipotle Bay. There's some here, and then you come back down to the Midas Basin. Okay, the Chiniko and Chipotle Bays, and those are the ones that are coming out this area here out of New Brunswick. Have a lot of siltstone and shale, okay? So that the eroded material from the siltstone and shale has a higher silt content, and it makes mudflats. And this particular stone here, like siltstone, has much finer, siltstone or mudstone is made out of much finer particles than sandstone. If you go to the Midas Basin, which is on the Nova Scotia side of the Bay of Fundy. It is red sandstone, like what you're seeing right here. And that eroded material has a higher sand content, so you end up getting more sand flats. But no matter what, there is heavy sediment loading in the bay. In New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, the riverbeds themselves tend to be made of a soft red sandstone. In between the sediment that comes into the bay and the tide churning, because these are the highest tides ever in the world, you get a lot of muddy water. And the sediment can be at levels of up to 50 grams per liter. And putting it in perspective, 50 grams out of 1,000 grams is about 5%. So if you had a bottle of this water, 5% of it would literally be sediment. Okay, this is a photo from NASA, and these are the Kachinko and Chipotle Bay areas up here, and this is the Minas Basin. And if you look at them, you can see, like you can see from space, that the water is quite muddy. And if you look here at the rivers that are flowing into the bay, these rivers themselves tend to have an element of muddiness to them also. Starting out here at Wasson Cliff, this is on the northern shore of Minas Bay. It has reddish sandstone, like right here, and a gray basalt. And I'm thinking this must be the basalt up here. It is a very important fossil find from about 200 million years ago, in that it has a full complement of life. It has the plants, the scavengers, the animals that ate them. It just the whole of the ecosystem is represented in the fossil record here, not just one bone. In this area, there are the world's smallest dinosaur tracks, and these are them right here, right next to a Canadian penny. And these were made by a robin-sized bipedal theropod, and a theropod has hollow bones and 3 toes on its feet with claws, or if you're a larger bird, talons. There were certain dinosaurs that were theropods, and in today's world, science looks at birds as being theropods, and they have drawn the lineage from birds to dinosaurs, or from dinosaurs to birds, depending how you look at it. This is the next set of cliffs is the Joggins Fossil Cliffs in Nova Scotia. Historically, coal was mined from these cliffs. And looking at a map of this particular area, there's at least 10, maybe closer to 12, 13 different cliffs that are noted for having coal reserves in them. I don't believe that coal is mined from them anymore. There are Carboniferous age fossils, and that's like 300 to 320 million years ago. And again, in this particular area, the entire food chain is representative. And that goes from your primary producers, from plants, scavengers eating the detritus that falls onto the bottom of the floor, ocean floor, or the floor of the forest at the time, predatory invertebrates, insects, and finally you get up to theropods. Pteropods, actually, that's what that one is. These are some of the fossils that they found there, and if you would interested in looking at the Joggins Fossil Cliffs website, there are a lot of fossils that are shown on it. But here are some of the ones that I thought were pretty interesting. This is a fossil root right here. This right here is a plant fossil, and it looks like a type of conifer. And I have some another fossil from another place on the Bay of Fundy that looks very similar to this. And this right here, oops. This right here is a Canadian $1 coin, which is probably half the size, is between a Susan B. Anthony dollar and a $1/2, if you could remember seeing any of those. Over here on the right is a lycopsis tree that was actually preserved in a standing position on the cliff. And looking at judging by the size of the geologist hammer that's here, is if you look at this, it's at least 6 or 7 feet long. So that's a large piece of a trunk, of a fossilized trunk of a tree. And these are what that type of tree would have looked like in life. Excuse me. Okay, and because there's so many coal deposits, you have stratified rocks along the coast in that area, and they're all from the Carboniferous period. And the Carboniferous period, which was like 300 plus million years ago, is when plants dominated the earth, and from that time period is where we, as current people living in the world, get coal, is from this time period. And one of the things that I thought was noteworthy about this, considering erosion, is that the sand here has a lot of darkness in it, and I'm thinking that probably it's eroding from these darker rocks, and probably have a high coal content in this shore. This is Fossil Beach in Cape Enraged, New Brunswick, and you quite a impressive array of cliffs here. These cliffs are a dark limestone, and they contain fossil veins. Like you see this dark spot right here? My wife and I went here, and we saw at least one vein that was at least 10 feet high, and possibly probably about 8 feet wide. And literally it was really dark when it was because of the fossils that were in there. The beach down below here, this fossil beach, that it's literally littered with fossils. You can't move on that beach without stepping on a fossil. And what happened is logs, plants, and leaves washed down the river that was here about 320 million years ago, and they got stuck there, and eventually they lithified, fossilized. This is adjacent to where we went down, and it's an adventure getting to that beach. At least it was back then. You had the option of rappelling, which cost money. It was a tourist thing. Or like what we did is we went down a set of stairs that reminds me of a Indiana Jones type of set of stairs. They seem kind of rickety and they seem kind of high, perched on the edge of a cliff, but that was the way that you could get down to the beach. Thinking now they probably have something a little more refined. This is a cordite, and this is a conifer-like plant, and this is what was at Cape Enrage. But this is also the type of fossil that from the Joggins fossil cliff. It looked like a cordite there. And interestingly enough, we were able to collect fossils from the beach. And this is a type of thing that you'd see. A rock like this is broken, and all these are fossil remains inside there. And they let you take specimens from the beach, but I'd found one that was about 75 pounds, and it was probably the best specimen I'd ever personally found. But it was too heavy to carry up those stairs, so it stayed on the beach. Some of the other things about Fundy, Old Sow is basically it's between the Maine and Canadian coast, and it's a whirlpool that's 230 to 246 feet wide. It's the largest whirlpool in the Western Hemisphere, and it is the second largest whirlpool in the world. And it is caused by the exchange of water between Fundy and Passamaquoddy bays. So it's a picture of it right here. One of the things that rivers up in the Fundy area are noted for are tidal bores. And this happens to be the Moncton tidal bore, Moncton being one of the I'm going to call it one of the first major cities that you get as you get into New Brunswick. And you can see this is the river, this is the ocean. This tide will push upriver at about 9 miles per hour. Okay, it's moving up there at a fairly good clip. And the leading waves up here can be up to 3 feet high. And looking at this picture, I've not been able to determine if these here are something in the water or if they're surfers. Can't quite figure that one out. But anyway, 3-foot waves up here, and they'll be coming up the river. Most rivers entering into Fundy, most rivers enter into funding have tidal bores. And when a tidal bore will often occur when you have a shallow estuary and a wide tidal range. Okay, there's a lot of water coming up and it's got to go somewhere, and it's going right up the river. This is another shoreline of Fundy. I thought it was pretty interesting view. Coming along is the Grand Manan Island, and it's between New Brunswick and Canada. And this is quite a noteworthy island and a good destination. But one of the things that's noteworthy about it is that this is actually made of flood basalt. And flood basalt occurs when a volcano will erupt and it's not spewing the material up in the air, but it's literally just flowing out of the ground. And when flood basalt eruptions occur, they can occur over thousands, and in some cases, like the Siberian traps, possibly millions of years. So this is a volcanic activity that lasted a long time. And I made note here, whoops, of that late Triassic period, about the same time that this was being laid down in the age of dinosaurs, there was an extinction event. And one possible cause of many of the extinction events that have occurred on Earth are volcano eruptions and them putting sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide into the air and changing the climate, cutting off vegetation and no vegetation, nothing for the herbivores to eat, nothing for the carnivores to eat either. This is the last picture. No, it's not the last, the second to the last picture of Grand Manan. And here you have an arch. And I'm looking at it, I always look at the bottom to see what fell down and filled inside there. But in time, this is going to fall down, and you'll probably have either a sea stack or just a big rock there, depending how much falls. This is the last picture of Grand Manan. I just thought it was just interesting to look at the shore over here, and it particularly looked like lava. And this is a fish weir. We talked about weirs last week. And this is an area where herring and sardines are a big deal. talking about Acadia, and we have Acadia National Park. Well, how to get that name? Acadia was a French colony of New France. Okay, in American colonial times, there was a lot of competition between the British and the French, possibly a few other European powers too. But in our neck of the woods, it was the British and the French. Acadia was established in the early 1600s by 60 French families, and it included the areas along the Fundy coast, Maine, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. Okay, the Acadians took advantage of the fertile salt marsh soil. There's a lot of salt marsh up in the Bay of Fundy. And I'm going to talk about how the Acadians were able to farm that. They practice Ubuntu farming, and an Ubuntu is literally a tide gate. Okay. Um, the Acadians, one thing I want to note here is the Acadians developed good relations with the Native Americans. Okay. The Wabanaki Confederacy, Wabanaki Native Americans are indigenous to Maine, and especially the Micmac were very close, or they were more allied with the French Acadians. I want to make note of this is that the French claimed the Kennebunk River as the border between Acadia and New England. Okay, this being New England, this being Acadia. And I want to include it because it shows just how far south, like that right down to Bath, was considered to be part of Acadia, the French territory. What the Acadians did is they constructed dikes. They made these levees like this. They piled the dirt up, and they also made drainage ditches. And they would put a butu or a tide gate down at the bottom of the dike. Oops. Okay. And this is how that floodgate or the Ubuntu would work. And I'm going to go to the low tide picture first. If you look at this, you might recall they dug drainage ditches. Well, the water comes out and it drains, and it's allowed to drain out of the marsh at low tide. But when high tide comes, the ocean water comes, pushes against the floodgate, and it closes it shut, and it will not let the salt water in. Okay, so when they dug the ditches in the marshes, they did two things. It lowered the water table because you didn't have high tide coming in on a regular basis, but also after a couple of years, the soil salinity would be reduced, and you could go through and plant vegetables, grains, whatever they decided to plant on it. Between 1630 and 1755, nearly 13,000 acres of salt marsh were reclaimed by the Acadians. And this is what one of those land systems or one of the projects would have looked like. Here's your dike and the floodgate here. You have a drainage ditch here. You have agricultural land that this was marsh, and now it's being used to grow crops. And one of the things that is interesting, and currently the Nova Scotia, they are actually working and reclaiming some of these marshes that had been drained in the past, but they're kind of things are starting to go kind of bad on them. The dikes are leaking, etc. They're starting to reclaim them, and this is actually one that has been reclaimed. And this is a picture of one of those, a butu or tide gate. And you can see that this would be the salt water. It will come against the door of the tide gate, pushes it shut, stops the water from going in. Now, some things happened with the Acadians, and it's kind of sad. In 1755 to 1778, the Great Expulsion took place. And it was during the French, it happened during the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763. The British distrusted the Acadians. Okay, they suspected that the Acadians, who were from France, would have an allegiance to France, though it seems that most of the Acadians themselves were neutral. Another thing that probably went against the Acadians is that the Wabanaki Confederacy aligned themselves with the French and fought the British. But the Great Expulsion was when the Acadians were deported to the 13 English colonies, France, and Louisiana. And the Acadians that landed in Louisiana are now what we refer to as Cajuns people. The Micmac tribe themselves assisted the Acadians in resisting the deportation. And this is kind of what it boils down to. The Acadian population was a little over 14,000. 11,500 were deported. More than 5,000 of them died of disease, starvation, or shipwreck. And if the the poem Evangeline by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow covered is a story about the Great Expulsion and about how a couple was separated and the lady spent the rest of her life trying to find the man that she was betrothed to. And I don't want to take away from the story, but he dies just as she finds him. Oh well. But that pretty much covers the Fundy coast. So do you have any thoughts or questions about it?
Gary, I think you had a question, but you're muted.
How about now?
Good.
Okay. Steve, with some of the rock formations that we can see through a number of the images you showed, some almost suggested to me glacier cutting. Do you know if was there ever any glacier activity up somewhere anywhere near the Bay of Fundy?
Actually, Gary, the Bay of Fundy was largely formed by glaciers.
Oh,
In the last ice, in basically the Gulf of Maine, the last ice age, it was entirely covered by glaciers.
gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Hey, Steve, this is
Yeah.
Ed.
Oh yeah.
I'm asking about the photographs that you showed. Fabulous presentation, by the way. Thank you so much. Some of them had writing on them. Are those your photographs or were those stock photos?
I don't know if there's what I wouldn't call them stock photos, but there were photos that are obviously found on the internet.
Okay, thank you.
I did look for my own of that Cape and Rage. I looked through our old pictures because I knew that we had to have a picture of the staircase and the fossils right in the cliff, but that was too long ago. Couldn't find him.
No, that great presentation. I like when you described going down via that staircase. Was there an elevator to go back up, or did you have to climb up those stairs?
Well, I will tell you, I would have had that big. It was actually about this big, but it wasn't. It wasn't real thick, but it has a great fossils in it. That would have gone up the stairs and would be in my backyard now.
Oh boy,
I wouldn't have trusted those stairs with another 75 pounds on them.
thank you.
I don't know if I would have trusted my back either, truthfully.
Any other questions from the group? You can feel free to type them in the chat if you're more comfortable. Oh, I see something in the chat. What's this? From Jen, really appreciated all the info and images and presentation. I can fully vouch that a visit to Fundy National Park and the Fundy Coastal Drive and Grand Manan is well worth it. Thanks, Jen.
You know, I will share this when in working on this project, it kind of makes me want to take a boat trip because you know, different things because this was Fundy, and I'm gonna do one about Maine coast, next one then and Cape Cod. And you know, you've been to some of these places, but all of a sudden you find, oh, there's some hidden gems or things that are much more interesting that you need to see while you're there.
Steve, I'm curious, you said you were able to take the fossils from that park. I don't know how many years ago that was, but do you think that's still true? So many parks, you know, don't want you to take things from them. So I was surprised when you said that.
I'm aware of that, and it was okay to do it then, and it actually said it on the literature. Because you know you don't want to be walking out with a handful of fossils, and truly I probably got about 7 or 8 different fossils from there. They're all pretty much the same, but I think there's so many fossils there that it probably, I don't want to say it doesn't make any difference, but there's just so many.
It's interesting. In many U.S. national parks, you're not even supposed to pick up a pine cone and remove that. Everything stays.
Yeah. And in reality, you know, well, I still collect rocks, but I, you know, I think I do it much more ethically now than and realizing, like, you know, be careful about what you take, and you know, making sure that I take it from a place that is acceptable to collect from.
Any other questions,
Donna,
Donna?
you're muted.
Donna, you're muted.
I find the story of the Acadians fascinating because I am of French Canadian descent. And my grandmother always said that we had Micmac blood on her side. And I find the stories of that era that, you know, and the Bay of Fundy area just fascinating. I wish she was still here with us so I could ask her a bunch more questions.
You know, it's almost like oh, Kathy, do you have a question?
No, I don't have a question. I just the idea you said you wanted to take a boat trip, that would be spectacular. I used to sail, and there are a number of places actually in Massachusetts and Maine that I first went to by boat. And it's an entirely different experience. Yeah. So I would say, I don't know who sails up there. We don't have that kind of boat. That's all done. But yeah, you could probably get on a boat up there, you know, and even just sail up and down the coast a bit.
Yeah.
And it would be a long way to sail from Maine. That would be a big enterprise. But I would go up there and get on a sailboat, you know. Good idea. It's beautiful
feasible.
presentation. Thank you.
I think there's a ferry that goes out to Grand Manan that I've heard about. So that's one type of boat
Right.
easily get on.
Yeah.
There are boats to or ferries to many of the islands, like Islesboro, Vinyl Haven, and
Right. Yep.
certainly one of the things about Maine is we certainly don't lack for a beautiful coast, and it's not generally not developed too badly.
Yeah. No, I was thinking the same thing. I was writing down some of the places because I would love to go up there again and just see that gorgeous area. So I'm up for a trip.
You've inspired us, Steve.
But perhaps the Wells Reserve needs to put together a bus trip, a bus trip to Fundy.
Or a boat trip.
A boat trip.
Either
Yeah.
way.
Count me in. Sign me up.
But it would probably be really good if it was like electrically powered, so that way we could say, oh, we're being carbon neutral about this.
Or even
Even
solar
better.
powered.
Hey, even better. Well, that's where the sailboat comes in.
Ah,
But unfortunately, it takes thousands of dollars to get into the sailboat.